They say the sea near our village sings at night, not waves, not wind, voices. Soft, beautiful, like a lullaby meant for the dead. I went to the pier once, when the fog was thick and the moon was high. Beneath the water, lights moved, not lanterns, but eyes. They looked like women, pale and graceful, singing to the tide. I listened until their song changed. The voices turned sharp, cruel, smiles twisting into teeth. That's when I understood the sea wasn't singing to me, it was calling me under.
The island lay shrouded beneath a thick veil of mist, the jagged cliffs carved by centuries of merciless waves, looming like silent sentinels against the night sky. A biting wind swept across the narrow streets, carrying with it the faint, salt tang of the sea and the subtle, almost imperceptible hum that had begun to haunt the islanders' nights. Yuan Maicliad stood alone on the rocky shore, his lean frame silhouetted against the silver wash of moonlight. The ocean before him was restless, its surface rippling in restless waves that whispered secrets only the wind could understand. But tonight, beneath the ceaseless roar and crash, a different sound wove its way through the air, a strange, melodic humming that seemed to pulse with a rhythm not of this world. He pulled his coat tighter around his weather-beaten frame, the salt and pepper strands of his hair tousled by the chill breeze. His eyes, deep and grey as the storm-tossed sea, narrowed as he strained to listen. The hum was faint but persistent, undulating with a haunting cadence that stirred a long-buried unease in his chest. Yet, Yuan told himself it was nothing more than the tricks of fatigue. Long nights at sea, the endless battle with the merciless ocean, and the weight of memories too painful to face, they all conspired to play cruel games with the mind. Behind him the village lay quiet. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the faint scent of peat fires and dried fish. The small fishing community clung to the island like barnacles, weathered and worn but stubbornly enduring. Their lives were entwined with the sea, a bond forged in hardship and necessity, yet fraught with an uneasy harmony. They trusted the ocean to provide but feared its caprice, aware that beneath its beauty lurked a merciless force. Yuan's gaze drifted upward to the darkened windows of the cottages that lined the shore. Flickers of candlelight danced behind cracked panes, casting long shadows that seemed to sway in time with the ocean's eerie lullaby. He could almost hear the whispered prayers of the islanders, their voices mingling with the wind and waves, seeking protection from whatever ancient power stirred beneath the surface. Turning away from the water's edge, Yuan made his way back to his small cottage nestled among the rocks. The wooden door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing the dim interior warmed by the flickering glow of a peat fire. The familiar scent of smoke and salt filled the room, grounding him in the present even as the ocean's song echoed faintly through the walls. He settled into a worn chair by the hearth, the weight of years etched into the lines of his weathered face. His hands, calloused and scarred from decades of hauling nets and battling storms, trembled slightly as he reached for a flask of whiskey. The harsh burn of the liquid offered little comfort against the growing chill that settled deep within his bones. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the window frame, carrying the ocean's haunting melody into the room. Yuan closed his eyes, willing himself to dismiss the sound, to banish the creeping dread that gnawed at his thoughts. But the lullaby persisted, a mournful chorus that seemed to call to something buried deep within his soul. He opened his eyes to the flickering shadows cast by the fire, his mind drifting back to the countless nights spent alone on the water. The faces of lost friends and his younger brother flickering like ghosts in the dark. The sea had claimed them all, stolen beneath the waves during violent storms that left the island reeling in grief. And now, it seemed, the ocean was singing for them, a sorrowful hymn that no one could silence. Yuan stood and moved to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. The sea stretched endlessly before him, its surface shimmering under the moon's pale light. The hum rose again, clearer this time, weaving through the crashing waves with a voice that was etchingly human. He whispered into the night, "What are you trying to tell me?" But only the ocean replied, its song carrying on, endless and unyielding, as the island slept beneath the watchful gaze of the stars. The night deepened, and with it, the haunting lullabies of the sea grew stronger, weaving their way into the fabric of the island's restless dreams. And for Iwan Macleod, the first whispers of a terrifying revelation had begun. As dawn threatened the horizon, Iwan's thoughts churned like the restless tides. Was it merely the weariness of a lifetime battling the sea that played tricks on his mind? Or was the ocean truly alive with voices that might yet draw him into its depths? The island's whisper had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The wind tugged at Iwan Macleod's worn jacket as he perched on the jagged rocks that edged the island shore. Above him, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow on the restless ocean. The waves rolled and whispered, their steady rhythm carrying an eerie melody that seemed to ripple beneath the surface, a haunting lullaby that no fisherman should hear without her knees. For years, Iwan had dismissed these nocturnal murmurs as tricks of fatigue, the sea playing cruel games with his wary mind. But tonight, the melody felt different, clearer, more insistent. He closed his eyes against the biting chill, straining to catch the words beneath the song. There it was again, faint but unmistakable, a name whispered on the wind. Colum. His heart stuttered. Colum. His younger brother, lost to the violent storm that had torn through the island's fleet years before. The same storm that had shattered Iwan's world and left scars he hid beneath a weather-beaten face. Iwan's breath caught as the name wove into the ocean's hum once more. Colum. He opened his eyes, staring out into the blackness where sea and sky blurred. Was it his mind playing tricks, or was something calling to him through the waves? The voices were growing, a chorus of murmurs rising from the depths, names of men lost to the ocean's cold embrace. Fishermen who'd vanished without trace, swallowed by the sea's merciless hunger. The island's uneasy harmony with the ocean had never felt so fragile. The next morning, the village stirred with whispers. At the supply shop, Mara Finlay handed over a sack of salted fish to a grizzled customer, her green eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows. She caught sight of Iwan standing outside, staring out toward the horizon with a haunted look. "Iwan," she called, stepping out into the brisk air. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He hesitated before answering, voice low and rough. "It's the sea. It's singing again." Mara's skepticism was a shield she wielded carefully. "It's just the wind and waves. You've been at sea too long." But Iwan shook his head, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "No, it's more than that. I hear names in the song The Drowned. And Colum." Mara's gaze softened. "Colum." He nodded, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I hear him like he's trying to reach me." The news spread quickly, seeding unease throughout the island. Some dismissed it as grief-fueled delusion. Others whispered prayers and crossed themselves. At the tavern, voices rose in nervous debate, the usual camaraderie fraying under the weight of fear. Old Hamish, the village elder, sat apart from the crowd, his gaunt face lit by the flickering hearth. When Iwan approached, the old man's eyes gleamed with a mixture of sorrow and warning. "The sea never forgets," Hamish rasped. "Nor does it forgive. The siren of the drowned sings for her own, and those voices you hear, they are tethered to her will." Iwan swallowed hard, the words settling like a stone in his gut. "You mean it's not just memories?" Hamish shook his head slowly. "No, lad. It's something older. Something hungry." That night, Iwan returned to the shore, the moonlight painting silver streaks across the waves. The lullaby rose again, the melody twisting and turning like a dark thread weaving through the wind. And then, clear as a bell, the voice came again, soft, urgent, achingly familiar. "Iwan." His breath hitched. It was Colum's voice, fragile but alive in the sea's song. Trembling, Iwan whispered back into the night, "I'm here, brother." The ocean answered with a mournful sigh, a wave crashing against the rocks as if in reply. The line between memory and nightmare blurred beneath the stars. Yuan knew, deep in his bones, that the sea was no longer just a place of work or survival. It was a living, breathing entity with a voice that carried the drowned and their secrets. And now it had found him. As dawn crept over the horizon, the island awoke to a new unease. The voices among the waves would not be silenced, and neither would the past. Yuan's journey into the heart of the sea's dark song had only just begun. But even as the villagers went about their day, casting cautious glances toward the restless ocean, an unspoken question hung in the air. What price must be paid to listen to the voices of the drowned? Yuan turned his gaze to the endless blue, a cold resolve hardening within him. Whatever the sea demanded, he would face it, for Colum, for the lost, for himself. The ocean's haunting lullaby was no longer just background noise, it was a summons, and Yuan could no longer ignore its call. The night held its breath, and the sea sang on. The morning light struggled through the dense mist curling off the ocean, casting an eerie glow on the jagged shoreline of the island. Yuan Macleod stood motionless on the rocks, his gaze fixed on the restless sea that stretched endlessly before him. The cold wind tugged at his weather-beaten coat, carrying the faint salt tang of the brine, and the haunting melody of the ocean's lullaby, a song that seemed to grow louder with every passing night. His thoughts drifted back to that terrible storm years ago when the sea had turned violent and unforgiving. He could still see it clearly, the blackened sky roiling with angry clouds, the thunder crashing like the roar of ancient gods, and the waves towering like mountains, swallowing the boats whole. Among those lost was Colum, his younger brother, full of life and promise, whose laughter once rang brighter than the gulls' cries, but was silenced forever beneath the waves. Yuan's jaw clenched as the memory twisted in his chest like a knife. The guilt had never eased, gnawing at him like the relentless tide. He blamed himself for not pulling Colum back, for the friends who had vanished in that storm, their fates entwined with his own failures. Now, as the voices in the sea whispered names he recognized, including his brother's, the past seemed to reach out with icy fingers, pulling him deeper into its abyss. Later that day, Yuan made his way to the village, the narrow paths familiar yet burdened with unspoken tension. The scent of dried fish and peat smoke hung in the air as he entered the local supply shop, where Mara Finlay was organizing crates. Her strong frame moved with practiced ease, but her piercing green eyes softened as they met his. Mara had always been pragmatic, grounded in the island's realities, yet her kindness shone through her skepticism. "Yuan," she greeted, her voice low but steady. "You've been out by the shore again. The voices, they were getting worse, aren't they?" He nodded, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "I hear them clearer now. Names I can't forget, Colum's voice among them." Mara stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. "You can't let it consume you. We have to hold on to what's real, for the sake of the island and yourself." Her words struck a chord, pulling at the fragile threads holding him together. Yet the sea's call was relentless, a siren's song weaving through his thoughts. That evening Yuan sought out old Hamish, the village elder whose gaunt figure seemed carved from the very cliffs themselves. The old man's cottage was dim, lit only by the flicker of a dying fire, the air thick with the scent of herbs and salt. Hamish's long white beard shimmered in the firelight as he spoke with a grave urgency. "The sea holds more than fish and storms, lad," Hamish said, his voice rough yet wise. "It's a realm of spirits, of those lost and forgotten. The siren of the drowned binds them to her will. These voices you hear are warnings and calls for justice." Yuan listened, the weight of ancient legends pressing on his shoulders. The old tales told of a woman swallowed by the sea, transformed into a vengeful spirit, who claimed the souls of the drowned to avenge betrayals and forgotten depths. The island's uneasy harmony with the ocean was more fragile than ever. Back in his small cabin, the night deepened around Yuan like a shroud. He lay awake, the lullaby of the sea now unmistakable voices whispering through the thin walls. Names, memories, and regrets swirled in the darkness, a cacophony of sorrow and accusation. His eyes traced the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight, the boundary between past and present dissolving into a haunting haze. The sea's song was no longer just a melody but a summons. Yuan's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and sorrow. He knew that to survive, he must face not only the supernatural forces that gripped the island, but also the shadows within his own soul. Yet the path ahead was uncertain, and the voices called on him to answer. As the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, Yuan rose from his restless night, the weight of the past heavier than ever. The island around him seemed to hold its breath, caught between the world of the living and those claimed by the relentless, haunting sea. And somewhere beneath the waves, the siren waited. Outside, the ocean's lullaby hummed softly, a song of loss and longing that promised neither peace nor reprieve. The island's shadows stretched long, and Yuan Makelid's journey into the heart of darkness was only just beginning. The wind had shifted overnight, carrying with it a chill that gnawed at the bones of the island. Yuan Makelid stood at the edge of the cliff, the rough stone biting into his boots, staring down at the restless ocean below. The sea was alive in a way it hadn't been before, no longer the steady pulse of waves against rock and sand, but a living, breathing entity that sang mournful lullabies in voices both foreign and achingly familiar. He had heard the whispers before, faint and easily dismissed, but tonight they were clearer, more urgent. The ocean hummed in melodies that twisted through the cold night air, carrying with them fragments of names, half-formed words, and the unmistakable echo of a voice that belonged only to him. Yuan's breath hitched as a sudden gust swept salty mist across the cliff face. He clenched his fists, knuckles white, and leaned closer to the abyss. The sea's song wrapped around him like a shroud, a siren call that tugged at something deep within his soul. Behind him, the village was silent, save for the distant creak of rigging and the occasional bark of a dog. The islanders had grown wary in recent days. Fishermen had begun to vanish without explanation, swallowed by the merciless waters or by shadows no one dared name. Whispers of curses and restless spirits filled the tavern and the narrow lanes, but no one had answers, only fear. Yuan turned away from the cliff and trudged back toward the heart of the island. His cabin awaited him, a modest structure weathered by decades of storms and salt air. Inside, the familiar sense of wood smoke and dried fish greeted him, but comfort was a stranger here. His eyes fell on the worn photographs, pinned to the wall, the faces of friends lost to the sea, their smiles frozen in time. Among them, the younger brother had never stopped mourning. That night, sleep was a stranger. The lullabies haunted his dreams, weaving through memories and visions too vivid to ignore. The sea had become a living nightmare, its song a desperate plea or a cruel trap. Yuan felt the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blur. The ocean's voice was no longer just a sound, but a presence that pressed in on him from all sides. In the dim light of dawn, Mara Finlay found him on the beach, staring out at the horizon where the sky bled into the restless waves. Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay the tremor of worry. "Yuan, you can't keep shutting yourself away. The island needs you, and so do I." He met her gaze, the weight of his silence heavier than any storm. "The sea's changed, Mara. It's not the same ocean I've known all my life. It's singing songs of death and loss." She stepped closer, the salt wind tugging at her dark hair. "Then we face it together. We find out what it wants, and we stop it before it takes any more." But even as they spoke, the ocean's lament rose once more, a haunting melody that spoke of sorrow, vengeance, and a darkness that refused to be drowned out. The island's uneasy harmony with the sea was unraveling, and Yuan knew the coming days would test him beyond anything he had ever faced. Night after night, the lullabies grew louder, more insistent. The vanished fisherman's absence was a void that echoed in every corner of the island, stoking fear and suspicion among the people. Old Hamish's warnings became desperate pleas, tales of ancient curses and restless spirits that refused to rest. Yuan's isolation deepened as the sea's song claimed more of his thoughts, pulling him into a spiral of torment and obsession. The voices of the drowned whispered secrets he was both terrified and compelled to hear. Each night, the ocean sang his own name, weaving him into its eternal hymn of loss. The islanders watched from their homes, eyes clouded with dread. Mara stayed by Yuan's side as much as she could, a tether to the world he was slipping away from. But even her steadfast presence could not keep the rising tide of fear at bay. The sea's lament was no longer just a song, it was a summons, a reckoning. And Yuan Maycleod, bound by guilt and haunted by the drowned, would have to confront the darkness beneath the waves, or be lost to it forever. As the first light of a storm-lit dawn crept over the restless sea, Yuan's resolve hardened. The ocean's haunting melody was a challenge, and he would answer it, no matter the cost. But deep beneath the waves, in the shifting shadows of a world between life and death, the siren waited, her voice rising in a song that promised no mercy. The sea's lament was only just beginning, and Yuan's battle for his soul and the island's survival was far from over. The cold wind swept across the rocky shore, carrying with it the mournful hum of the ocean as twilight blurred into night. Yuan Maycleod stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the restless waves that clawed and whispered beneath the fading light. It was a song unlike any other, a lullaby sung by the sea itself, ancient and aching, weaving through the salt-laden air with a spectral voice. Tonight, the ocean's melody was different. There was a clarity, a chilling sharpness that pricked at the edges of Yuan's mind. He could hear them, the drowned. Their voices swirled within the song, each name a shard of memory, each whisper a thread pulling him closer to the depths. At first, it was faint. Just a trick of the wind, he told himself, fatigue playing cruel games with his senses. But as the night deepened, the voices grew bolder, weaving through the crashing waves like a dark symphony. Then came the unmistakable sound, the soft, trembling echo of his own voice. Yuan's breath caught as he heard it blend seamlessly with the chorus of the drowned, a spectral harmony unlike any he had ever imagined. His heart pounded against his ribs, a fierce, desperate drumbeat in the vast, cold silence. The sea called to him not as a place of livelihood or struggle, but as a living, breathing entity hungry for the lost and the broken. The melody wrapped around him, a siren's embrace that spoke of sorrow, regret, and a longing that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Yuan staggered back from the water's edge, the salt air thick with the taste of impending doom. Inside the small fishing hut, Mara Finlay sat by the flickering candlelight, her fingers absently tracing the worn wood of the table. She had always been practical, a skeptic when it came to the old tales and superstitions that clung to the island like morning mist. But the change in Yuan was undeniable. The once stoic man now carried a haunted look, his eyes distant and troubled. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I hear them," he said, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resignation. "The drowned. They speak my name, and others I knew." Mara's heart clenched. She wanted to dismiss it, to anchor them both to reality. But before she could reply, a sudden, ethereal song drifted through the cracked window, a melody so pure and sorrowful it stole the breath from her lungs. Her skepticism wavered, replaced by a dawning terror she could no longer deny. That night, beneath a sky swallowed by clouds, Yuan took to the sea. The small boat rocked gently as he rode into the mist-shrouded waters, his fingers gripping the oars with white-knuckled desperation. The ocean's surface shimmered with a ghostly light, as if the very depths were stirring to life. Around him, the lullabies swelled, the voices rising in a haunting chorus that blurred the line between memory and nightmare. He heard Column's voice, first soft, pleading, a fragile echo of the brother he had lost to the sea's fury years before. Then came others, friends and neighbors, whose faces haunted the village's whispered stories. And beneath it all, his own voice, mingling with theirs, calling out across the void. The boat trembled, rocked by unseen tides, and Yuan's mind teetered on the edge of madness. The sea was no longer a place of work or survival, it was a realm of spirits and sorrow, pulling him toward a destiny he had long feared. The siren song promised release, or perhaps oblivion. Back on shore, the islanders gathered in hushed clusters, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Fishermen had begun to vanish, swallowed by the restless ocean or perhaps claimed by the curse that now seemed undeniable. Whispers of the sea's haunting lullabies rippled through the community, sowing discord and dread. Mara approached Yuan cautiously, the distance between them charged with unspoken fears. Their shared silence spoke volumes. Both understood that the battle was no longer just against the elements, but against a supernatural force entwined with their very souls. "We can't run from this, Yuan," Mara said softly, her green eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. "The sea's singing has changed everything." Yuan nodded, the weight of guilt and sorrow pressing down on him like the crushing depths. "Then we face it," he whispered. "Together." As the lullaby faded into the night, the haunting melody lingered, an eternal echo of the drowned, and a chilling reminder that some voices, once heard, can never be silenced. The ocean waited, patient and merciless, its song growing louder with every passing night. And Yuan Maekliad, caught between worlds, was drawn ever deeper into its dark embrace. The heavy wooden door creaked open beneath Yuan's hand, the familiar scent of salt and aged timber greeting him like an old friend. The cottage of old Hamish was a sanctuary of whispers and shadows, a place where the island's past clung stubbornly to every corner. Mara followed close behind, her arms crossed, eyes sharp but carrying a hint of wariness. Inside, the dim glow of a single oil lamp flickered against walls crowded with relics, weathered nets, faded photographs, and maps yellowed by decades of sea spray. Old Hamish sat hunched near the hearth, the firelight dancing on his gaunt face and long white beard. His eyes, though clouded by age, held the spark of a man burdened with knowledge. "Sit," Hamish rasped, patting the worn stool beside him. "There's much to tell, and the sea's song grows louder tonight." Yuan exchanged a glance with Mara before settling down. The distant murmur of the ocean seeped through the cracks in the walls, a haunting melody that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the island itself. Hamish reached for a bundle of brittle parchment, tied carefully with a faded ribbon. With deliberate care, he untied it, revealing sketches and handwritten notes, fragments of a story buried beneath waves and time. "Long ago," Hamish began, voice low and thick with emotion, "there was a woman among us, fair as the morning tide and beloved by all. Her name has been lost to many, but the sea remembers." He unfurled a drawing of a ghostly woman with hair like flowing seaweed and eyes dark as polished pearls. "They say she was taken by the ocean, swallowed whole during a fierce storm. But her spirit did not rest. Instead, she became the siren of the drowned, a vengeful soul bound to the sea's depths." Mara leaned forward, skepticism warring with curiosity. "Why would she turn against us?" "Betrayal," Hamish answered simply. "Love and trust broken beneath the waves. The siren claims the souls of those lost, especially those forgotten or wronged by the living." Yuan's heart tightened. The weight of his own losses, the brother, the friends pressed heavier with every word. After the tale, Hamish handed them a weathered ship's log discovered years ago in the village archives. The pages were brittle, ink faded, but the entries spoke of a ship caught in a storm, its crew lost to the sea's wrath, and whispered warnings of a curse lingering over the waters. In the quiet that followed, the lullabies outside grew more distinct, the voices threading through the night air like sorrowful hymns. Yuan pressed a hand to the rough wood of the window frame, eyes scanning the restless sea. "This is no ordinary haunting," he murmured. "It's a reckoning." Mara nodded, her gaze steady despite the chill creeping down her spine. "We need to know everything. If there's a way to break the curse, it lies in the past." Hamish's gaze flickered to the dark horizon beyond the window. The sea keeps its secrets well, but it also remembers those who listen. The night deepened, the cottage filling with the fragile hope born of ancient stories and newfound resolve. Outside, the ocean hummed its mournful lullaby, the siren's song weaving through the island's soul an eternal call to confront the shadows beneath the waves. Yuan and Mara prepared for the journey ahead, their path illuminated by the flickering light of history and the daunting promise of battle yet to come. The legends had resurfaced, and with them, the island's fragile peace teetered on the edge of the abyss. As the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, the sea whispered once more a soft, haunting lullaby that promised both danger and salvation. And Yuan knew with a grim certainty that the next time the siren's song echoed through the night, he would be ready to face the darkness it carried. The wind had shifted that evening, carrying a chill that seemed to seep into the bones of the islanders gathered in the small community hall. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a flickering glow that danced across the rough wooden walls, illuminating faces etched with worry and exhaustion. It was the first town meeting since the disappearances began. 3 fishermen lost without a trace, swallowed by the sea that never truly rested. Yuan Makliad sat near the back, his broad shoulders hunched, eyes dark beneath heavy brows as murmurs filled the room. The ocean's distant hum trickled through the cracked windows, a lullaby turned sinister, threading through the anxious voices. He caught sight of Mara Finlay, standing near the front beside old Hamish, her green eyes sharp and steady despite the growing tension. "We can't keep turning a blind eye," a tall man with a weather-beaten face growled, slamming a fist on the wooden table. "Something's taken our men, and it's not just the sea's hunger. We've fought these waters for generations," another woman replied, voice trembling. "But there's a darkness now, something no net or anchor can catch." Accusations began to fly. Outsiders suspected of curses, old grudges reignited, whispers of witchcraft and restless spirits. Yuan's jaw tightened. Fear was contagious, and the island's fragile peace threatened to unravel. After the meeting dispersed, Mara approached, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "Yuan, you can't keep shutting us all out. The island needs you, your strength, your voice." He looked away, the weight of his own guilt pressing down. "What good am I if I can't even protect my own?" "You're not alone in this," Mara said softly, stepping closer. "But we have to trust each other. Otherwise, the sea wins." Their words hung between them, fragile as the sea foam at their feet, as the waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks. The air was thick with unsaid fears, the rift widening between them despite their shared desperation. That night, old Hamish sat alone in his cabin, surrounded by shelves cluttered with relics of the sea, weathered nets, faded maps, and journals filled with ancient lore. His gnarled fingers traced the lines of a faded rune, the candlelight flickering and casting ghostly shadows that wavered against the walls. The old man's eyes, sharp despite his age, flicked towards the window where the ocean whispered its endless, haunting lullaby. "The sea doesn't forget," he whispered to himself, voice rough like the stones beneath the waves. "Nor does it forgive." Outside, the island fell into an uneasy silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The ocean's hum rose again, a chilling lullaby that threaded its way through the village, wrapping around the hearts of those left behind. It was a song of sorrow and warning, a reminder that the tides of fear were rising, and with them, the darkness that awaited. Yuan stood at the shoreline, the cold spray of salt water stinging his face, the wind tugging at his coat. He gazed out into the restless sea, searching for answers in the shifting waves, in the voices that had haunted his dreams. Somewhere within that vast, merciless expanse was the siren, the spirit binding the drowned to her will, feeding on their sorrow and rage. But as fear tightened its grip on the island, Yuan knew the greatest threat might not come from the sea itself, but from the fractures growing among his own people. If they could not find strength in each other, the darkness would consume them all. With a deep breath, he turned back towards the village, determination hardening like the stones beneath his boots. The tide was turning, and he would need every ounce of courage to face the storm ahead. The ocean's song lingered in the air, a haunting melody of loss and longing, but beneath it, a new note began to rise, a note of defiance, fragile yet unyielding. The battle for the island's soul had only just begun. The days that followed were marked by increasing tension. The villagers whispered in corners, eyes darting nervously towards the sea and each other. Yuan noticed the subtle shifts, the way neighbors avoided one another, the sharpness in otherwise friendly greetings, the glances filled with suspicion. Mara kept close, her presence a steadying force amid the growing chaos. Yet even she struggled to mask her doubts, her practical nature battling the creeping fear that this was more than just superstition. One afternoon, as the sun fought to break through heavy clouds, Yuan and Mara met near the old pier. The waves slapped against the weathered wood, the scent of brine thick in the air. "We can't keep going like this," Mara said, voice low but firm. "The island's falling apart," he nodded, eyes shadowed, "and the sea's song grows louder. We need to find out what it wants, and if it's the siren. Then we face her together." Their shared resolve flickered like a candle in the wind, fragile, but not yet extinguished. As twilight deepened, Yuan returned once more to the shore. The lullaby rose again, weaving through the crashing waves, carrying voices both familiar and alien. Among them, the faint echo of his brother's name, a haunting reminder of the past and the price of forgetting. He clenched his fists, the ocean's cold grip tightening around his heart. The tides of fear had come, but so had the tides of courage. The battle for the island's soul was at hand, and Yuan Macleod would not let it be claimed without a fight. The night had settled over the island like a heavy shroud, the moon a pale guardian in the ink-black sky. Yuan Macleod stood alone on the jagged rocks by the shore, the salt breeze biting through his weathered coat. The ocean's lullaby rose around him, a strange melody woven from the whispers and murmurs of the deep. He had heard it before, a haunting symphony that no ordinary sea could produce, but tonight it carried a new, dreadful clarity. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, each note a thread that pulled at the edges of his memory. Then, amidst the rising tide's song, a figure materialized, ethereal, shifting, and impossibly real. The siren of the drowned was no longer a legend whispered in fearful tones. She was here, standing in the churned foam, her luminous form glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her hair flowed like seaweed, tangled and alive, drifting with the currents as if part of the ocean itself. Her eyes, dark and glistening like black pearls, met Yuan's with a sorrow so deep it seemed to echo the very depths of the abyss. The siren's lips parted, and from them came a voice, both beautiful and terrible, singing the names of the lost names Yuan knew too well. A shiver ran down his spine. The melody was a lament, a plea, and a demand entwined in one. It reached into the marrow of his bones, stirring guilt and grief that had long been buried beneath layers of stoicism. The siren was calling, and among the drowned voices was his own, the voice of a man haunted by the past, tethered to the sea's eternal sorrow. Yuan's breath caught as the apparition dissolved into the night mist, leaving only the echo of her song behind. The ocean calmed, but the weight of her presence lingered, heavy and unyielding. Days later, in the dim warmth of the island tavern, Yuan sat across from Mara Finlay. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the worn wooden walls. His hands trembled as he recounted the encounter, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "She was real, Mara," he said, voice low and strained. "Not just a story or a dream. The siren, she's out there, and she's calling for us, especially me." Mara's eyes searched his face, the skepticism she usually wore giving way to concern. "Yuan, these stories, they've been told for generations. But seeing her, that's something else. I heard my brother's name in her song," Yuan confessed, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Column, I can't ignore this anymore." The room seemed to grow colder, the sea's distant lullaby seeping through the cracks in the walls. Mara reached across the table, her hand steadying his. "We'll face this together," she promised, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her own fears. That night, sleep was a stranger to Yuan. The siren's song haunted his dreams, a chorus of voices rising and falling like the waves. He saw his brother's face, pale and waterlogged, reaching out from the depths, beckoning him toward a darkness he was desperate to escape yet drawn to inexorably. Outside, the ocean glowed with an unnatural light, shadows dancing beneath the surface where secrets waited. The boundary between the living and the dead thinned, and the island itself seemed to hold its breath. At dawn, Yuan found himself at the pier, the cold wood slick beneath his boots. Mara stood beside him, her presence a fragile tether to reality. Together they watched the restless sea, the siren's song still echoing in their ears, a haunting melody that promised danger and demanded reckoning. "We can't run from this," Yuan said, voice firm despite the fear that clung to him like a second skin. "She's tied to the drowned, to the souls I failed. If I don't face her, no one else will." Mara nodded, her green eyes steely with resolve. "Then we face it together, whatever comes." As the sun pierced the horizon, casting light on the restless waters, Yuan felt the first flicker of hope amid the encroaching darkness. The siren's song was no longer just a curse, it was a call to redemption, a battle for the souls bound to the sea, and the man who must confront his past to break free. But the ocean is patient, and its lullabies eternal. Tonight, the song would grow louder, pulling Yuan deeper into the abyss where only the brave or the damned dared to tread. And the siren was waiting. The sky darkened rapidly over the small fishing island, the late afternoon light fading beneath a thickening shroud of steel-gray clouds. Winds rose from the ocean, sharp and biting, rattling the wooden shutters of the cottages and whipping strands of seaweed tangled in the docks. Yuan Makelid stood at the edge of the pier, eyes narrowed against the gusts that carried the scent of salt and impending rain. The sea, usually a restless companion, now seemed a living beast snarling beneath the heavy sky. Its surface churned with restless waves that hissed and spat like a warning whispered in a language only the islanders knew too well. "Storm's coming," Mara's voice broke through the howling wind, steady but edged with concern. She approached carrying a coil of rope, her dark hair tousled and damp from the salty air. Her green eyes searched Yuan's face, seeking confirmation. Yuan replied, his gravelly voice almost lost in the rising gale. "And it's no ordinary one. The sea's got a hunger tonight." They worked side by side, moving quickly to secure the fishing nets and haul the smaller boats to safer moorings. Their hands were steady but their movements sharp, a practiced rhythm born of many storms, weathered together yet never quite like this. The lullabies, the strange, haunting songs that had begun to weave into the night soundscape, were growing louder, more urgent. Yuan could almost hear the layered voices beneath the wind's roar, calling out names he knew too well. "You hear it too, don't you?" Mara asked, her voice dropping as they ducked beneath the low awning of the supply shack. Yuan nodded, swallowing the lump tightening in his throat. "It's like the sea's singing for us all to listen, but there's a darkness behind it now." As twilight slipped into night, the island's other inhabitants hurried indoors, shuttering windows and lighting fires against the chill that crept with the storm. Old Hamish was already at the cliff's edge, his gaunt figure silhouetted against the angry skies. The wind tugged at his long white beard as he muttered incantations, words shaped by years of lore and fear. He wasn't a man given to theatrics, but tonight his presence was a solemn reminder of the island's fragile hold against the ancient powers submerged beneath the waves. Inside the cramped fisherman's hut where Yuan and Mara had gathered, the lantern cast flickering shadows that danced across the walls, alive with the restless energy of the brewing tempest. Mara's hands trembled for a moment as she lit a candle, the glow revealing the tension etched into her sun-tanned face. "We can't keep running from this," she said quietly. "The sea's not just angry, it's calling something forth." Yuan's eyes darkened. "I know. It's the siren. And she's stronger now, feeding off the storm. His voice was heavy with the weight of memory and fear. "We'll need all we got to hold her back." Suddenly, the house shuddered as a sharp gust slammed against the wooden walls. Outside, the ocean's lullabies sharpened into piercing, melodic whispers that seemed to weave through the howling wind like threads of ice. Iwan pressed a hand to the rough wood of the table, feeling the vibrations of the restless sea beneath his fingertips. "It's coming," he whispered, "and we standing right in its path." The storm was no longer just a threat of nature, it was a harbinger of the supernatural, a crescendo to the island's long-held fears. As thunder rumbled in the distance and lightning flashed across darkened sky, Iwan and Mara exchanged a look, one of determination, dread, and an unspoken promise to face the coming night together. Beyond the walls of their shelter, the ocean continued its eerie song, a haunting lullaby that promised both terror and revelation. The island was alone against the storm, isolated by wind and water, and the boundary between the living and the drowned was thinning with every crashing wave. The night stretched ahead, vast and uncertain, carrying with it the restless spirits of the sea and the desperate hope of those who dared to listen. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered like a bruise over the island. The sea, once a churning fury, now lay restless and grey beneath a pale dawn sky. Iwan Makelid stood at the edge of the rocky shoreline, his boots sinking slightly into the wet sand as he surveyed the wreckage that the tide had revealed. It was an ancient ship, broken and scattered like bones strewn by the ocean's merciless hand. Beside him, Mara Finlay squinted against the wind, her gaze fixed on the remnants half submerged in the tide pools. "I never thought I'd see anything like this so close," she murmured, voice edged with a mix of awe and unease. Iwan nodded slowly, his weather-beaten face grim. "The sea's been trying to show us something." The wreck sat awkwardly between the jagged rocks, its timbers warped and waterlogged, seaweed clinging like mourning veils to its fractured frame. The air smelled sharp with salt and decay, a heavy breath of history exhaled from the depths. They climbed carefully onto the ship's broken hull, the wood creaking beneath their feet. Inside, faded carvings etched into the beams told stories of voyages long lost to memory. A rusted locket lay half buried in the silt, a delicate thing, its clasp corroded but still intact. Iwan reached down, brushing the grime away to reveal a faded engraving, a woman's face, serene yet sorrowful. Mara crouched beside him, her green eyes reflecting the dull gleam of the artifact. "This must be her," she said softly. "The woman from old Hamish's tales, the one who became the siren." Iwan's fingers tightened around the locket. The connection was undeniable. This was no mere ghost story. It was a tragedy etched in the very bones of the island. Later, in the dim warmth of the village hall, old Hamish's voice wove through the flickering shadows cast by a single lantern. His gaunt face was drawn tight with the weight of remembered grief. "She was one of us once," he said, voice trembling. "A daughter of the sea, lost to betrayal and storms. The ocean took her, but it did not let her go. The legend unfolded of love, loss, and vengeance bound by salt and sorrow." Iwan listened, each word chipping away at the walls he'd built around his guilt. The siren was not merely a monster but a mirror of pain, a spirit born of the island's darkest secrets. As dusk blurred into night, Iwan found himself alone once more on the rocky shore. The sea's lullaby drifted faintly on the breeze, a haunting melody that seemed both a warning and a call. Clutching the rusted locket, he felt a fierce resolve kindle within him. The past could not be undone, but perhaps the future could be wrested from the ocean's grasp. The storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, promising a reckoning. Iwan's journey was far from over, in fact. It was only just beginning. The sea that sang lullabies for the drowned was waiting, and he would have to face its song on his own terms. His breath caught in the chill evening air as the waves whispered secrets long buried beneath the tides. He looked out over the restless ocean, his eyes reflecting its depths, and knew that to break the curse, he would have to dive headfirst into the darkness. The shipwreck had revealed its secrets, and now the island's fate rested on the edge of a knife, balanced between redemption and ruin. Yuan turned from the shore, the echo of the siren's song following him into the night, a haunting promise of the battles yet to come. The ocean hummed its mournful tune, and Yuan Makeliad steeled himself to answer. The village hall was thick with tension, the air heavy with the scent of damp wool and burning tallow candles that flickered against the old wooden beams. Islanders gathered in clusters, their faces etched with worry and suspicion, voices rising in sharp bursts that echoed off the stone walls. The usual camaraderie had curdled into suspicion. Whispers about missing fishermen, strange songs from the sea, and the looming curse had fractured the community's fragile peace. Yuan Makeliad stood near the back, his weather-beaten face shadowed by a furrowed brow. His eyes, reflecting the ocean's depths that he knew so well, scanned the room with a wariness born of years at sea and recent torments. His presence was met with a mixture of respect and wary distance. The once solid bonds of friendship and trust had begun to fray. Mara Finlay was at his side, though the space between them felt charged and brittle. Her piercing green eyes, usually steady and pragmatic, darted anxiously between neighbors and friends. She was the island's practical voice, often the grounding force for Yuan, but tonight even her skepticism seemed worn thin by the growing unease. An argument flared near the center of the hall. A grizzled fisherman accused a newcomer of bringing bad luck, his voice rough and urgent, his hands clenched into fists. Others murmured their agreement, some nodding, others shaking their heads in frustration. The fear that had been simmering for weeks boiled over, dividing the islanders into factions. Old Hamish, the village elder, stepped forward, his gaunt figure leaning heavily on his cane. His long white beard swayed as he raised a trembling hand for silence. Enough, he rasped, his voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. The sea does not choose sides lightly. It remembers the past, the betrayals, and the debts owed. We must stand together, or we will all be lost to the depths. His words stirred a hush, but the uneasy silence was fragile. Doubts and anger lingered like fog, clouding the hearts of those present. Later, under a cold drizzle along the jagged shore, Yuan and Mara faced each other, the wind whipping around them, carrying the salt spray of the restless sea. Their breaths formed white clouds in the chill air, and the waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks below. "You don't trust me," Mara said quietly, her voice barely audible over the wind. Yuan's eyes darkened. "It's not that simple. You don't understand what we're dealing with. The sea's song. It's not just a warning. It's a reckoning. But we need to face it together," Mara replied, stepping closer. "If we fall apart now, the island falls with us." He looked away, the weight of his guilt and the memories of lost friends pressing down. "I can't lose anyone else." Their fragile bond, once a beacon of hope, now trembled on the edge of breaking. Inside the local tavern, the fire sputtered weakly as old Hamish gathered a small group around his worn wooden table. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as he recounted ancient island lore, tales of the siren of the drowned and the price paid by those who ignored the sea's warnings. "The spirit binds the souls of the lost," he said, eyes glinting with urgency. "She waits for those who carry the weight of betrayal in their hearts." The listeners exchanged uneasy glances, the old superstitions no longer mere stories but warnings that felt dangerously real. Alone later that night, Yuan stood at the cliff's edge, the wind lashing his salt and pepper hair, the ocean roaring below like a beast awakened. The sea's lullaby hummed in his ears, a haunting melody that both beckoned and threatened. His isolation was complete, the fractures in the island mirrored within himself. The burden of leadership, guilt, and fear weighed heavily, yet beneath it all, a stubborn ember of resolve flickered. As the chapter closed, the island's fractured bonds hung precariously, the community divided and vulnerable. Yuan and Mara's strained relationship mirrored the larger rift, while old Hamish's desperate warnings underscored the growing danger. The question remained, Would they find a way to mend what was broken before the sea claimed them all? The ocean's song continued its haunting lullaby, a chilling reminder that beneath the waves, the drowned waited and the boundary between life and death was thinner than ever. The chill of the evening air bit sharply against Ewan Makeled's weathered skin as he stood motionless on the rugged cliffs overlooking the restless sea. The horizon was a charcoal smear against the dimming sky, the last vestiges of sunlight swallowed by gathering twilight. Around him, the island held its breath. A hush fell over the scattered homes and fishing boats bobbing in the harbor below. But beneath the calm surface, the ocean was singing. It was a song he had heard before, one that threaded through his dreams and waking hours alike, a haunting lullaby woven from the voices of the drowned. Tonight, however, the melody carried a clarity that twisted Ewan's heart with an unbearable weight. He strained to listen, every muscle taut, as the waves whispered and hummed in a language older than memory. And then, through the symphony of the sea, a voice broke free, unmistakable, fragile yet piercing. Ewan, Ewan, his breath caught in his throat. The voice was achingly familiar, young, vibrant, a lifetime ago. Callum. His brother's name was carried on the salt-laden wind, a spectral thread pulling at the frayed edges of his sanity. Ewan's eyes darted wildly over the dark waters, searching for a sign, a shape, anything to anchor him to reality. But the sea only sang on, a chorus of lost souls mingling with the sound of surf and wind. The fisherman's knees buckled, and he sank to the jagged rocks, the weight of years and regrets crashing down like the waves below. Images flooded his mind, the violent storm that had torn Callum and others from their lives, the helplessness that had haunted him ever since. Behind him, footsteps approached softly on the gravel path. Mara Finlay's concerned voice broke the spell. "Ewan, are you all right? You've been out here for hours." He forced himself to rise, brushing sea spray from his coat, attempting a steadiness he did not feel. "I heard him," he whispered hoarsely, Callum's voice in the sea. Mara's sharp green eyes searched his face, torn between skepticism and sympathy. "The sea's been restless. Old Hamish says it's more than just wind and waves this time." The village elder's warnings echoed in Ewan's mind, tales of spirits bound to the ocean's depths, of curses that twisted time and memory. That night, the boundary between life and death thinned dangerously on the island. In the dim glow of his cottage, Ewan sat with Mara nearby, the distant lullaby a constant, chilling presence. He confessed fragments of his torment, the guilt that gnawed like a relentless tide. Mara listened, her hand resting lightly on his arm, an anchor in the gathering storm. Days later, old Hamish gathered a small group by the hearth, his voice rough but steady as he recounted the island's dark past. "The siren of the drowned," he said. "She calls the lost back into the sea's embrace, and those caught in her song can't find their way home." Ewan's resolve hardened. The voices in the deep were no longer distant echoes but urgent summons. The spectral boundary was collapsing, threatening to swallow the island whole. One moonless night, drawn by the siren call, Ewan walked the cliff's edge alone. The ocean below shimmered with ghostly shapes, the faces of the drowned flickering like candle flames in the dark water. The sea's lullaby rose to a deafening crescendo, the voices weaving through Ewan's soul, pulling him toward the abyss. In that moment, the past and present collided, the spectral and the living intertwined. And Ewan faced the terrifying truth: to save himself, the island, and the souls lost to the sea. He must confront the haunting voices and his own haunted heart before the ocean claimed him forever. The night's silence was shattered by a sudden, piercing cry carried on the wind, a call to action, a challenge, a plea. Ewan's eyes narrowed, determination flickering amid the shadows. The sea sang its lullabies, but this time he would answer. A low, murmuring wind swept through the creaking beams of old Hamish's cottage, carrying with it the salt-tinged breath of the restless sea. Inside, the flickering candlelight danced across weathered faces, ancient maps, and maritime relics that spoke of generations lost to the ocean's depths. Iwan Maklid sat rigid, fingers laced tightly, his eyes fixed on the gaunt figure of old Hamish, whose voice seemed almost to echo from the very shadows themselves. The siren Hamish began, his gravelly tone heavy with age and warning, was once a woman, a soul caught between mercy and vengeance. She's bound to the sea, her song a call to those drowned, to reclaim what was lost. We've heard her in the wind, seen her in the mist. And now she calls for you, Iwan. His eyes, sharp despite the years, locked with Iwan's, the weight of his words settling deep. Mara Finlay stood close, arms crossed, the skepticism etched in her green eyes softened by concern. What can we do? She asked, voice steady but edged with fear. We can't just wait for the ocean to take more of us. Hamish nodded slowly. Knowledge is our weapon. The old shipwreck, he said, holds secret symbols carved into the timbers, songs etched into the salt-stained wood. They tell of the curse and how the siren's rage might be quelled. The resolve crystallized between them like the first sharp bite of a coming frost. Preparations began at dawn. The island's usual bustle was subdued, the air thick with unease. Iwan and Mara moved with purpose along the rocky shore, their boat a small but sturdy vessel battered by years of storms and salt. Each plank and rope bore the scars of the sea's cruelty and kindness alike. Heavy packs were loaded with lanterns, ropes, and talismans old Hamish had blessed, each item a thread in the fragile web of their hope. The sky above darkened ominously, a bruised canvas of swirling grey as the storm gathered its strength. The salty tang of seaweed and spray clung to their skin, mingling with the taste of adrenaline and fear. Ready. Mara's voice was barely audible over the rising wind. Iwan's jaw tightened, as I'll ever be. The boat shuddered as it pushed off, cutting into the roiling waves that seemed to grow more restless by the second. The lullabies of the ocean whispered faintly beneath the storm's roar, voices woven into the wind like ghostly threads tugging at their souls. Iwan's hands gripped the tiller, knuckles white, while Mara scanned the horizon, eyes sharp for any sign of the siren's spectral form. The sea was a living thing, its moods shifting with terrifying unpredictability. The wind howled, whipping their clothes and hair, while the boat pitched and rolled. Beneath the surface, dark shapes moved, shadows dancing just beyond the reach of flickering lantern light. The haunting melody grew louder, a siren song both beautiful and terrifying, weaving a spell of dread around them. As they ventured further, the storm's fury seemed to pulse in time with the song. The air grew thick with salt and magic, the line between reality and nightmare blurring beneath the grey sky. Then, in a moment of eerie calm, the sea's surface mirrored the tumultuous heavens, a glassy expanse broken only by faint, ghostly lights beneath the waves. Iwan's breath caught. She's near, he whispered. Mara's grip on the rope tightened, eyes wide but resolute. Then it's time. The hunt had begun, a perilous dance between the living and the dead, between guilt and redemption. The ocean sang its mournful lullaby, and Iwan knew the battle ahead would not only test their strength, but the very core of their souls. But beneath the fear, a fragile thread of hope endured, binding them to the promise that perhaps, this time, the song might end differently. As the boat sliced through the dark waters, the first chilling notes of the siren's call floated to them, a haunting melody that promised both salvation and doom. And the night held its breath. The sky above the island darkened swiftly, a heavy cloak of storm clouds rolling in like a beast awakening from the depths. The air thickened with salt and electricity as Iwan Maklid stood at the edge of the small fishing dock, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea churned with unnatural fury. Beside him, Mara Finlay secured the ropes to their boat, her hands steady despite the ominous rumble of thunder that vibrated through the island. "We don't have much time," Mara said, her voice nearly lost beneath the rising wind. "That lullaby's growing louder. The siren's coming." Iwan's jaw clenched. The voices in the sea had never been more insistent, a chorus of drowned souls calling his name, weaving his own voice with theirs. He could feel the weight of their sorrow and rage pressing in, as if the ocean itself wished to pull him beneath the waves. "Then we face her," he replied, his tone resolute, but tinged with the exhaustion of years spent haunted by loss. They pushed off from the dock, the small boat groaning against the swell as the first fierce gusts of wind tore through the sails. The ocean rose like a living monster, waves crashing and hurling spray that stung their faces and blurred their vision. Yuan gripped the tiller with knuckles white as he fought to keep the boat steady, every instinct honed from decades on the sea screaming at him to turn back. But he could not now. Mara leaned into the storm, her eyes sharp and unwavering.
"Hold fast, Yuan!"
"The siren's not just in the water, she's in the wind, the waves, the very air around us." Her words were true. Amid the roar of the tempest, ghostly whispers tangled with the howling gale, weaving a haunting melody that clawed at their sanity. The ocean's lullaby rose into a terrifying symphony, voices of the drowned swirling like a storm within the storm. Suddenly, a spectral glow illuminated the roiling waters, a pale, ghostly figure emerging from the depths. The siren. Her hair was a cascade of writhing seaweed, drifting like dark tendrils in the furious current. Her eyes, black as the deepest ocean pearls, locked onto Yuan with an unyielding gaze that pierced through the veil of night and storm. She sang a haunting, sorrowful melody that echoed in Yuan's mind, blending with memories he had tried to bury, his brother's laughter, the screams of friends lost to the sea. The boat pitched violently as Mara shouted, "Yuan, fight her song."
"Don't let it pull you under!"
A wave crashed over the bow, drenching them in icy water and threatening to capsize their fragile vessel. Yuan's heart pounded in his chest as the siren's voice grew louder, calling to him, promising release from guilt and pain if only he would surrender. His grip faltered, the darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. But then he caught Mara's determined stare, fierce and unwavering even amid the chaos. Her voice cut through the tempest as she called his name, grounding him in the storm. "We're not alone in this. Remember who you are." The ocean's song faltered for a moment, the spectral figure recoiling, as if stung by the strength of their bond. Yuan seized the moment, fighting back with every ounce of will he had left. The boat surged forward, breaking through the wave that threatened to swallow them whole. Around them, the sea's lullaby faded to a low, mournful hum, the siren retreating beneath the waves, but her presence lingering like a shadow. Exhausted but unbroken, Yuan and Mara clung to each other as the storm began to abate. The sea remained restless, the haunting whispers never fully silenced, but they had faced the maelstrom and lived. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with bruised purples and fiery golds, Yuan knew their battle had only just begun. The siren's song had revealed new depths of darkness, and with it, a sliver of hope. With Mara's hand in his, he vowed to uncover the truth behind the curse and finally break the ocean's eternal, haunting lullaby. The air simmered with the aftermath of the storm, salt clinging to their skin, and the taste of rain lingering in their mouths. Yet beneath the surface of this fragile calm, the sea still hummed its eerie tune, a reminder that the boundary between life and death was thinner than ever. Yuan stared into the restless waters, feeling the pull of the drowned souls and the weight of his own past. Somewhere in that restless tide lay both his redemption and his doom. The question was whether he could hold on to hope long enough to face it. The sea thrashed with a fury that seemed almost sentient as Yuan MacLeod and Mara Finlay stood at the edge of the jagged rocks, the ocean's dark waters swirling beneath an angry sky. The storm had not yet broken, but the air was thick with the scent of salt and impending rain. Around them, the ocean hummed a low, chilling lullaby that sent shivers coursing through Yuan's veins. The song was no longer just a whisper on the wind. It was a tangible presence, rising and falling like a living thing. There, Mara whispered, gripping Yuan's arm as a glowing figure began to coalesce amid the waves. It shimmered like moonlight caught in restless tides, its form both beautiful and terrifying. The siren of the drowned, so old Hamish had warned, was no longer a shadow in the dark, but a luminous spectre. A ghostly woman whose hair flowed like seaweed tangled in the current, and whose eyes were the deepest black pearls, reflecting the abyssal depths of the ocean itself. Yuan swallowed hard, the weight of years of guilt and loss pressing down on him like the crushing depths. He could hear the faint voices of the drowned rising in a mournful chorus, a choir of souls bound to the siren's will. Among them, his brother Colum's voice rang out, a fragile thread of hope and despair entwined. "Why do you haunt us so?" Yuan called into the wind, his voice hoarse but steady. "What do you want from us?" The siren's eyes locked onto his, and the ocean's song swelled into a haunting melody that seemed to carry centuries of sorrow. In that moment, the world around them shifted. The storm's fury became a backdrop to a vision unfolding before Yuan's eyes, a spectral flashback that peeled away the layers of time. He saw a woman alive once, her face young and radiant, standing on this very island. She laughed beneath a sunlit sky, her hands weaving fishing nets with care and hope. But shadows crept into her life, betrayal by those she trusted, abandonment by the sea she revered. A violent storm claimed her, dragging her beneath the waves, her cries swallowed by the cold depths. Transformed by grief and rage, she had risen again, not as a mortal, but as the siren, a spirit bound to the drowned soul she claimed. Her vengeance was born not of malice alone, but from a profound sorrow and a desperate need to be remembered, to reclaim those lost and forgotten. Yuan's chest tightened. The enemy he had feared was not a mindless monster, but a tragic figure, a mirror to his own pain and loss. The island's haunt was a lament, a song of mourning echoed through the restless sea. "I know your pain," Yuan said softly, stepping closer to the luminous apparition. "I have lost too much, but this endless suffering, it need not be our fate. Let them go. Let us find peace together." The siren hesitated, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. The voices of the drowned rose in a crescendo, their mournful wails threading through the storm's howl. For a moment, the boundary between anger and sorrow blurred. Mara reached out, her green eyes shining with quiet strength. "We want to help," she said firmly. "You don't have to be alone in this." The siren's gaze softened, a flicker of ancient humanity breaking through the spectral facade. Yet the ocean's song still clung to her, a binding force that resisted release. Yuan knew this was only the beginning. Understanding the siren's tragic past had changed everything, but the path to redemption would demand more than words. It would require courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to face the darkest depths of the soul. As the storm raged around them, Yuan stood firm, the haunting melodies swirling like a tempest in his mind. The siren watched, the ocean's lullaby a bittersweet hymn that promised both doom and salvation. And in that charged moment, the fate of the island, and all who called it home, hung precariously between the living and the dead. The sea's eternal song echoing into the night. The night had descended upon the island like a shroud, thick and suffocating. The ocean's lullaby, soft, eerie, yet irresistibly melodic, rolled in with the tide, weaving through the jagged cliffs and spilling over the shore like whispered secrets. Yuan Mackled stood at the edge of the rocky promontory, eyes fixed on the restless waves below. His breath came ragged, each inhale sharp and cold against the salt-tinged air. The storm from the previous night had passed, but the sea remained wild, thrashing as if alive with vengeance. He could hear it clearly now, the song, the siren call that had haunted his every waking moment for weeks. It was not just the waves or the wind, but voices. Voices of the drowned, once his friends and kin, now trapped in a spectral chorus beneath the surface. And amidst them, unmistakably, his own voice echoed back at him, distorted and haunting, a ghostly mirror of his guilt. Yuan's fingers curled around the rough stone, knuckles whitening. The chill in his bones was not from the wind, from the certainty that the sea was calling him home, not as a living man, but as one of its endless, drowned legion. A sudden swirl of mist rose from the water, coalescing into an ethereal figure. The siren of the drowned, luminous and terrible, emerged from the depths. Her hair was strands of seaweed that writhed and shimmered, eyes like black pearls glinting with cold fire. Her voice when she sang was both sorrowful and enraged, a lament that clawed at Iwan's soul. "Come to me, Iwan," she whispered, her words curling through the air like tendrils of smoke. "Join us beneath the waves, forever free from pain." Iwan's heart hammered wildly. Memories surged unbidden, the violent storm that had claimed his brother Callum and their friends, the helplessness, the crushing guilt that had buried him alive inside. From the mist, a shimmering figure took shape. Callum. His face was pale, eyes deep pools of sorrow and accusation. No words came, but the silence spoke volumes. "I failed you," Iwan whispered, voice breaking. "I should have saved you." The siren's song twisted, wrapping around his thoughts, promising release from the torment of living with that guilt. The sea's cold embrace beckoned. But then a sharp cry shattered the spell.
Iwan!
Mara's voice, raw and desperate, cut through the fog from the shore. "Hold on!"
Don't let go!
Her presence was a lifeline, a tether to the world of the living. Iwan's eyes searched the swirling mists, finding her silhouette against the dim light of dawn creeping over the island. The internal battle raged between surrendering to the seductive pull of the siren and fighting for redemption. Summoning every ounce of strength, Iwan clenched his jaw and shouted, "No!"
I am not yours!
The spectral chains binding him to the depths shattered like fragile glass. The siren's form flickered, her mournful song turning to a wail of rage and despair before dissolving into the morning mist. The waves calmed, the ocean's lullaby softened to a gentle hum. Iwan collapsed onto the rocks, gasping for breath, the sting of seawater and salt in his mouth a cruel reminder of how close had come to the abyss. Dawn's light spilled across the island, bathing the battered shore in fragile hope. The crossroads of his soul had been reached. He had chosen to fight not just the siren, but the shadows of his own past. As the island stirred to life, Iwan knew the battle was far from over. But in that moment, he tasted something long denied, a flicker of peace amid the haunting tides. The wind howled like a living thing, whipping the salt spray into Iwan Makeled's face as he stood ankle-deep on the jagged rocks that jutted like broken teeth from the restless sea. Around him, the ocean churned violently, waves crashing with a fury that seemed to echo the turmoil within his soul. The sky was a roiling mass of storm clouds, fractured by jagged bolts of lightning that illuminated the spectral figure wavering just beyond the surf, the siren of the drowned. Her form was both beautiful and terrifying, shifting like water itself. Seaweed tangled in her ghostly hair writhed as if alive, and her eyes, black pearls that reflected the abyss, fixed on Iwan with an ancient hunger. The air thrummed with the mournful melody of her song, a haunting lullaby that wrapped around him like a shroud, pulling at memories and guilt he had long tried to bury. The voices of the drowned rose in a chorus, sorrowful, angry, desperate, swirling through the storm like restless spirits seeking release. Iwan's heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the weathered wooden talisman Mara had pressed into his palm earlier that evening. Its worn surface was etched with ancient island symbols, relics of a time when superstition and reality intertwined more tightly than the nets of the fishermen below. He glanced toward the cliffs where Mara stood, her strong figure silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky. Her piercing green eyes were wide with fear but also fierce determination. Clutching the talisman tightly, she shouted words of encouragement that were nearly drowned by the storm's roar. "You're not alone, Iwan.
Fight her!
Her voice carried on the wind, steady and resolute. Drawing a deep breath, Iwan fixed his gaze on the siren. "I know your pain," he called out, his voice strong despite the tempest. "I hear the voices too. But this ends tonight." The siren's lips parted, and her song twisted into a wail of rage and sorrow. The sea around him glowed with an unnatural bioluminescence, pulsing with the rhythm of her lament. The drowned souls surged forth, ghostly forms rising from the depths, their faces blurred but their grief palpable. Among them, Iwan glimpsed the face of his brother Callum, younger, vibrant even in death, eyes pleading for release. A sudden surge of waves knocked Yuan off balance, and the siren's hands, cold and wet like the ocean depths, reached for him, attempting to drag him beneath the waves. Panic flared, but beneath it a steely resolve ignited. Yuan grasped the talisman and raised it high, chanting the ancient words old Hamish had taught them, words meant to bind and banish the restless dead. By the blood of the living, by the memory of the lost, I claim you no more, he intoned, voice rising above the sea's howling. The spectral hands faltered, the siren's form flickering and wavering. The drowned voices crescendoed into a cacophony of grief and fury, then began to soften, their cries melting into whispers. Yuan held firm, calling out the names of the drowned fishermen, his voice raw with pain and love. Colum, Hamish, Mara's father, all of you, be free. Slowly, the ocean's song shifted. The mournful wail softened into a gentle hum, like a mother's lullaby soothing a restless child. The siren's luminous form dissolved into the mist, her final sigh a haunting echo of sorrow and release. Yuan collapsed onto the rocks, the storm's fury abating as if in response. Mara rushed to his side, her hands steadying him. Old Hamish appeared behind her, eyes shining with tears and pride. "You've done what many believed impossible," Hamish whispered. "You've broken the curse." Yet, even as relief washed over them, a quiet melancholy lingered in the air. The ocean still moved with a restless grace, its lullaby now softer but eternal, a reminder of love lost and memories that refused to fade. Yuan knew this night marked an end and a beginning, a fragile peace born from courage, sacrifice, and the acceptance of haunting truths. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with pale gold and soft pink, Yuan stood and looked out over the sea. The voices were gone, but the ocean's song remained a timeless hymn for the drowned, for the living, and for the fragile thread that bound them all. "It's over," Mara said quietly, slipping her hand into his. "For now," Yuan replied, his eyes reflecting the endless tide. "But the sea will always sing." And with that, the island held its breath, listening to the gentle hum of the sea, a lullaby for the lost, a song of hope for the living, and the eternal song of the ocean that never truly rests. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean yet scarred, much like Yuan himself. As dawn stretched its pale fingers across the sky, casting a muted glow over the island, Yuan Maekliad stepped from the small boat onto the familiar rocky shore. The sea, though calmer than the night before, still pulsed with restless energy beneath the surface, its eternal song now softened, less threatening, but no less present. His boots sank slightly into the cold, wet sand as he surveyed the battered village. Houses stood battered but unbroken, their weathered wooden frames creaking gently under the weight of the morning breeze. The scent of salt, rain, and the faintest hint of smoke from last night's fires mingled in the crisp air. Seagulls called overhead, circling with a nervous energy that mirrored the still tense atmosphere. For a moment, Yuan closed his eyes and let the familiar sounds and smells wash over him, grounding him in the place he had fought so hard to protect. A figure waited by the wooden pier, framed by the skeletal remains of fishing nets and the scattered debris left in the wake of the storm. Mara Finlay stood with her arms crossed, her short dark hair damp and tousled, eyes sharp and searching. When their gazes met, a silent understanding passed between them, the kind that words could never fully capture. Relief flickered in her piercing green eyes, though the scars of the past weeks, the losses, the fears still lingered beneath her calm exterior. "You made it back," she said softly, voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and hope. Yuan nodded, his weather-beaten face tight but softened by a faint, wary smile. "I had to, for all of us." Together, they moved toward the village, the sounds of waking life growing louder. Islanders emerged from their homes, faces etched with exhaustion and guarded hope. Conversations were hushed, but there was an undercurrent of cautious optimism. The sea's lullaby had shifted. It was still there, a constant reminder of what had been lost, but now it carried a mournful gentleness, a song of remembrance rather than menace. Inside the village's heart, old Hamish's cottage was a beacon of warmth and steadiness. The elderly man sat by the hearth, his gaunt face illuminated by flickering flames, long white beard catching the light as he spoke. Around him, a small group of islanders gathered, drawn together by the need to find comfort and understanding in the storm's aftermath. The sea Hamish began, his voice steady despite the chill that clung to the room. She sings a different song now, not of rage, but of sorrow. The spirits are restless, but they seek peace. We must remember their stories, their lives, so they may finally rest. Iwan listened, the weight of the man's words settling deep in his chest. He thought of his brother Callum, of the friends lost to the ocean's fury, and of the siren's tragic song that had nearly claimed him. The scars left by the ordeal were not just physical. They ran deep, carved into his soul by grief and guilt. Yet somewhere beneath the pain, a tentative light flickered, a hope born not from forgetting, but from facing the past and moving forward. As twilight descended, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, Iwan found himself drawn to the cliff's edge. The wind tugged at his coat, and the salty tang of the sea filled his lungs. He stood alone, eyes fixed on the restless ocean below, the waves murmuring a softened lullaby that seemed to echo both loss and promise. The song was different now. It was a reminder of what had been lost, yes, but also a call to remember, to honor, and to endure. Iwan closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him, feeling the fragile peace settle within. Behind him, the island began to breathe again, slowly, cautiously, but with a strength that would carry them through whatever tides lay ahead. But as the ocean sang its eternal song, one question lingered in the air, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. How long could this fragile peace last against the sea's restless, haunting depths? Iwan's journey was far from over. The ocean's lullabies were eternal, and its song, like the tide, would always return. The island waited, and so did he. The dawn broke gently over the island, casting a soft, golden light that filtered through the swaying sea grasses and kissed the weathered rooftops of the village. The ocean, once a tempestuous and restless force that had sung chilling lullabies beneath the veil of night, now murmured with a gentler, almost forgiving hum. Iwan Makelad stood at the edge of the pier, the rough wood cool beneath his calloused hands. Beside him, Mara Finlay breathed in the crisp morning air, her eyes tracing the horizon where sea met sky in a seamless line of promise and uncertainty. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the island was not gripped by the tight fist of fear. The disappearances, the haunting voices, the suffocating dread all had loosened their hold, replaced by a tentative hope that wove its way through the community like the light breeze that softened the early morning chill. Iwan's gaze lingered on the water's surface, where gentle ripples caught the rising sun's glow, sparkling like scattered jewels. The ocean's song was still there, an eternal presence, but the sinister edge had faded, replaced by a lullaby that soothed rather than tormented. Mara's voice broke the silence, soft yet steady. The sea's changed, Iwan. It's listening now, maybe even forgiving. He nodded slowly, the weight in his chest easing just a fraction. Aye, but it's still the sea. We can't forget that. Their steps led them back toward the village, where the first signs of life began to stir. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the salt air as islanders emerged from their homes, wary eyes meeting with cautious smiles. The long shadow of suspicion and grief that had stretched over the community was lifting, but only just. Inside the village hall, the atmosphere was markedly different from the tense gatherings of weeks before. Islanders clustered in small groups, their voices rising in hesitant conversation, laughter blooming like fragile flowers in the warm glow of the hearth. Old Hamish, his white beard catching the firelight, leaned forward to share a tale not of doom, but of resilience and the enduring spirit of the island. His words wove a thread of continuity, reminding all that the sea had long been both a giver and taker, a force to respect and fear. Yuan watched from the doorway, Mara beside him, her presence a steady anchor. The community's healing mirrored his own tentative steps toward redemption. The gulf that had once yawned wide between him and the villagers was narrowing, bridged by shared experience and the collective will to move forward. Yet beneath the surface, the ocean's eternal song whispered reminders of lives lost and debts unpaid. Later that day, the shore was alive with the rhythmic snap and tug of fishing nets being mended. Yuan worked alongside Angus, the young apprentice whose bright eyes held the spark of hope for the island's future. Their hands moved in practiced harmony, weaving strength into each knot, weaving resilience into the fabric of the community. "You're getting better," Yuan remarked, a rare smile breaking across his weathered face. Angus grinned, undeterred by the man's usual reserve. "Learning from the best." The sea called softly in the background, its lullaby a gentle accompaniment to the work and camaraderie unfolding on the shore. It was a reminder that the ocean, with all its mystery and menace, was an inseparable part of their lives, a force both feared and revered. As evening approached, Mara prepared a simple meal in the warmth of her shop's kitchen. Sunlight slanted through the windows, casting golden patches across the wooden floor. Yuan sat quietly at the table, the tension that had once gripped him loosening under the steady cadence of Mara's presence. "It's strange," Mara mused, breaking the comfortable silence. "Seeing the island like this alive again." "Strange, yes," Yuan agreed, his voice low. "But a good strange." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the walls built from years of guilt and pain cracked, just enough to let in the possibility of healing. "We've both got scars," Mara said gently, "but maybe they don't have to define us." Yuan nodded, a flicker of something like hope stirring deep within him. "Maybe they don't." Outside, the ocean sang its softened lullaby, a timeless reminder of the delicate balance between life and death, between memory and letting go. The island breathed with cautious optimism, each heartbeat a testament to resilience and the human spirit's capacity to endure. But as night fell and the stars blinked awake, the sea's eternal presence remained a haunting melody in the background of their lives, forever a part of the island's soul and of Yuan's journey toward acceptance. And somewhere in the depths, the siren's song lingered, quieter now, but never truly gone. The dawn had come, but the story was far from over. The morning light crept slowly over the horizon, casting a pale, silvery sheen across the restless ocean. Yuan Macled stood at the edge of the rocky shore, his boots sinking slightly into the damp sand, the cold sea breeze tugging at his salt and pepper hair. The ocean hummed its familiar lullaby, no longer a sinister chant, but a soft, persistent murmur that wove through the air like a breath drawn from the depths. He closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him, each wave's rise and fall a note in the eternal song that had come to define the island's soul. For years, the sea had been both his adversary and his companion, its voice a source of dread and sorrow. Now, after the storm had passed and the siren's curse had been broken, the song felt different. It was a mournful echo, a remembrance of the souls lost to its depths, yet it was no longer a call to despair. Instead, it was a living memory, an inseparable part of the island's heartbeat. Yuan's gaze shifted to the village behind him, where smoke curled gently from chimneys and the faint murmur of life stirred. The island was waking, scarred but resilient, much like himself. He thought of Mara, her steady presence a beacon throughout the dark days. She was waiting for him in the small cottage near the harbor, the place they had begun to rebuild their trust and hope. He turned inland, the sound of footsteps behind him catching his attention. Mara approached, her green eyes bright with the promise of a new day, her skin still kissed by the sun. "Morning," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted the crisp air. "Morning," Yuan replied, a rare softness in his tone. They stood side by side, listening to the sea's gentle song. "It's quieter now," he observed, "but it's still there. Always will be." Mara nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sky and sea merged. It's part of us, Yuan. The island, the ocean, the memories, all tangled together. We can't run from it, and maybe we don't want to. Yuan considered her words. For so long he had fought the haunting voices, the guilt that had plagued him since Colum's death. Yet now, acceptance felt not like surrender but a kind of peace. I suppose it's not the sea that's restless, he said quietly. It's us carrying what we've lost. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant, familiar voice of old Hamish, who was already gathering a small group in the village hall. Yuan and Mara made their way to the weathered building, where the old man sat on a creaking bench, his long white beard catching the morning light. Gather round, Hamish beckoned, his voice rough but compelling. There's a story to tell, one for the living and the lost. The hall filled with the islanders, faces marked by hardship yet illuminated by the flicker of the firelight. Hamish spoke of ancient times, of the sea's gifts and its curses, of the siren who once sang for love but became a wraith of vengeance. His words wove the past into the present, reminding everyone that their lives were bound to the ocean's eternal rhythm. Yuan watched the faces around him, young and old, skeptical and believing, and felt a thread of connection weaving through them all. The haunting lullabies were not just echoes of death, but calls to remember, to honor, and to endure. As twilight descended, Yuan found himself walking the shoreline again, a lantern in hand. The moon cast a cold light over the waves, which shimmered like liquid silver. The lullabies rose once more, softer now, a gentle hum that seemed to cradle the island in a tender embrace. He breathed in the salty air, feeling the weight of his past lighten just a fraction. The sea would always sing of sorrow, of loss, of hope, and so would he. But beneath that fragile peace, a question lingered, as persistent as the ocean's song itself. Could the island ever truly be free of its haunting echoes? Or were they destined to ripple through its soul for all time? Yuan's eyes met the dark horizon, where the sea whispered secrets to the night. "We'll find out," he whispered, stepping forward into the eternal tide. The old community hall sat heavy with the scent of sea salt and burning peat, shadows flickering against the timber walls as the islanders gathered under the low ceiling. Old Hamish, gaunt and weathered, settled onto the creaking wooden bench at the front, his long white beard resting like a cloud on his chest. The room was quiet but for the soft murmur of voices and the occasional creak of timber, a hush that seemed to hold the weight of generations. Hamish's eyes scanned the faces before him, rough hands folded in laps, eyes bright yet shadowed with loss and endurance. His voice broke the silence, deep and steady, weaving through the gathered crowd like the tides outside. Long before any of us were born, before this island was even named, the sea held stories of those who gave their lives to her depths. We remember them not as ghosts, but as part of who we are. They live in the waves, in the wind that howls through the cliffs, and in our hearts. Yuan sat near the back, his salt and pepper hair catching the firelight. The lines etched into his face told of years battling the sea, but tonight they softened with the weight of memories. His eyes, deep and reflective like the ocean's depths, held the ghost of his younger brother Colum and the friends lost to storms long past. The stories Hamish told were not just ancient folklore, they were threads that tied the islanders to their shared pain and resilience. Mara, seated beside him, rested a steady hand on his arm. Her green eyes, sharp and caring, met his with unspoken understanding. The distance that had stretched between them since the storm was slowly bridging, tempered by the collective grief and the hope rekindling in the room. Hamish's tales flowed on, recounting the legends of the siren of the drowned, the vengeful spirit that bound the souls of those lost at sea, and the sacrifices made by the islanders to keep her wrath at bay. He spoke of the ancient rituals, the songs sung to soothe the restless waters, and the bravery of fishermen who faced the ocean's fury with unyielding courage. As the stories unfolded, the islanders leaned in, their breaths shallow, eyes moist with remembrance. The past was alive here, not a burden, but a legacy. They honored those who never returned, not with sorrow alone, but with fierce pride and an unbreakable bond forged by shared loss. Yuan's mind wandered to Column's laughter, the rough camaraderie of the men lost in the storm, and the unbearable silence that followed. Yet, in this hall filled with voices and stories, he felt the first stirrings of peace. The sea's song was no longer a siren's wail of despair, it was a hymn of remembrance, a call to live on and protect what remained. When Hamish's voice finally trailed into a gentle hush, the room held a breathless pause. Then, one by one, the islanders bowed their heads, hands clasped tightly, as if to hold the ghosts close without letting them break free. The only sound was the wind's mournful cry through the cracks in the walls, and the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore. Mara squeezed Yuan's arm, grounding him in the present. He met her gaze and nodded, a silent promise passing between them. The island had endured storms far worse than this, and together they would face whatever the restless ocean still held. As the gathering slowly dispersed into the night, the fire's glow faded, but the warmth lingered, a testament to the strength found in shared grief and the enduring legacy of those claimed by the sea. Outside, the ocean hummed its eternal lullaby, softer now, carrying the voices of the drowned not as torment, but as a solemn blessing. The islanders returned to their homes with heavy hearts but lighter spirits, bound anew by the stories told and the memories honored. In the distance, the lighthouse beam swept across the dark waters, a beacon of hope in the endless night. Yuan stood at the edge of the pier later, gazing out over the restless sea. The stars were veiled by clouds, but the ocean's song reached him, still a haunting melody transformed into a legacy of remembrance and resolve. Somewhere in the depths, the siren of the drowned lingered, but so did the strength of those who refused to forget. And as the tide whispered against the shore, Yuan felt the first true breath of peace since the darkness had fallen. The sea's lullaby was eternal, a reminder that life and death danced on the edge of the waves, and that memory, like the ocean, would never truly fade. Tonight, the island was united, its past embraced and carried forward like a fragile flame against the gathering dark. And though the ocean's mysteries remained, the legacy of the drowned had found a voice in the hearts of the living. The stories were far from over. The morning light crept softly over the horizon, painting the sky in pale washes of gold and pink. Yuan Maicliad sat on the jagged rocks that edged the island's shore, his gaze fixed on the gentle swell of the ocean before him. For the first time in many long months, the sea's song was quieter, no longer a chorus of torment, but a subtle hum that seemed to cradle the island in a fragile embrace. Beside him, Mara Finlay settled carefully, the rough fabric of her fisherman's coat rustling in the cool breeze. They had come here at dawn, away from the watchful eyes of the village, seeking a moment of peace between them. "It's calmer today," Mara said softly, her green eyes tracing the horizon where the water met the sky, almost like the sea's finally catching its breath. Yuan nodded, swallowing hard. His throat felt tight, as if the sea had twisted a knot there long ago, only now beginning to loosen. "Ah," he replied, his voice rough but steady. "Maybe it's giving us a chance to breathe too." They shared a silence that was not uncomfortable, but weighted with years of unspoken grief and tentative hope. Mara reached out, her hand brushing against Yuan's, a small gesture that carried the weight of 1,000 words. He turned to look at her, seeing not just the pragmatic, skeptical woman he had often sparred with, but someone who had stood by him even when the darkness felt overwhelming. "I've been thinking," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time we stop fighting the sea and start listening differently." Yuan's eyes searched hers, the vulnerability he found there opening a fissure in the walls had built around himself. "Listening differently, huh?" She smiled faintly. "Not just the sea's song, but each other, the island, the people. We've been so caught up in fear and blame, we forgot how to hold on to hope." The words stirred something deep within Yuan, a fragile seed of redemption taking root. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise to try. Later, inside Mara's small supply shop, the scent of salted wood and dried herbs filled the air. Mara poured steaming tea into chipped mugs, handing one to Yuan. Their fingers brushed again, lingering this time, a quiet comfort amid the lingering shadows of their shared past. "You've been through hell," Mara said gently, "but you're still here. That counts for something." Yuan swallowed the warmth of the tea, the liquid a balm to his frayed nerves. "I've carried a lot of ghosts," he admitted. "But maybe it's time to let some go." Outside, old Hamish's voice rose like a weathered song, gathering a small crowd by the fire pit near the village square. His stories of old tales of the islanders who had faced storms, loss, and the sea's wrath wove a tapestry of resilience. The flicker of the firelight danced on his gaunt face as he spoke, reminding the islanders that while the sea was a force of nature and spirit alike, their strength lay in their unity. Yuan watched from the doorway, the crackling flames reflecting in his eyes. The community was fragile but enduring, their shared history a beacon in the twilight of fear. As dusk fell, Yuan found himself drawn to the cliffs once more. The wind tugged at his salt and pepper hair, the scent of brine sharp and familiar. He stood there, the vast ocean stretching endlessly before him, no longer a source of haunting, but a companion bearing the weight of memory and possibility. The lullabies of the drowned had quieted, replaced by a silence that spoke of healing. He breathed deeply, feeling the steady pulse of the tide beneath him. The sea was eternal, its song unending, but so too was the human spirit's capacity to endure, to forgive, and to find peace. Yuan turned back toward the village, the path ahead uncertain but no longer walked alone. Mara's presence was a steady anchor, the islanders' cautious trust a fragile bridge. The healing waters had begun to wash over the scars left by sorrow and dread, carrying with them the promise of a new dawn. Yet as the ocean's gentle hum whispered through the night air, Yuan knew the sea's mysteries were far from fully revealed. The line between life and death, past and present, remained thin. But for now, in this moment of fragile hope, he embraced the quiet, ready to face whatever tides the future might bring. The sea that once sang lullabies for the drowned now offered a softer song, one not of despair, but of tentative redemption and the enduring strength of those who dared to listen. The night wrapped the island in a velvet cloak, the sky a deep indigo sprinkled with distant stars. Along the jagged cliffs, Yuan Macleod stood silently, the cool air tugging at his worn coat. Below, the ocean breathed softly, its restless waves now whispering a gentle lullaby rather than the menacing chorus that had haunted the island for so long. The once ominous melody had softened into something tender, a song of solace and remembrance rather than dread. Yuan's gaze traced the silver ribbons of moonlight dancing across the water's surface. Each ripple seemed to carry a fragment of the voices that had tormented him, his brother Colum's laughter, the whispered apologies of lost friends, the mournful sighs of the sea itself. But tonight, those voices wove together in harmony, a quiet symphony that soothed the soul rather than tearing it apart. He closed his eyes, breathing in the salt-laden air, feeling the weight of years pressing against his chest begin to ease. The sea, once an unyielding force of nature and supernatural terror, had become a companion in his long journey toward peace. The haunting dread that had once gripped his heart was now tempered by a profound sorrow, a mourning that had finally found its quiet resolution. Behind him, footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path. Yuan turned to see Mara Finlay approaching, her green eyes reflecting the moon's glow. She moved with the ease of someone who belonged to the island as surely as the sea did. "I thought I might find you here," Mara said, her voice low but warm. "The sea's song, it's different tonight, isn't it?" Yuan nodded, a faint smile touching his weathered lips. "It's like it's finally letting us breathe." They stood side by side, gazing out over the tranquil waters. Mara broke the silence. "I've seen you wrestle with those voices, Yuan. But tonight, I think you're finally listening on your own terms." He looked at her, the years of guarded isolation flickering away in the soft light. "Maybe it's time I stop fighting the sea and start understanding it." The breeze carried the lullaby to their ears, a melody that felt like a promise, a quiet assurance that the island and its people could endure. Later, within the village hall, old Hamish sat by the fire, his gaunt frame illuminated by flickering flames. Around him, a small gathering of islanders listened intently as he recounted the legends of the sea, the stories of the siren of the drowned, the lost souls, and the eternal bond tying the islanders to the ocean's depths. His voice wove through the room like a thread connecting past and present. Outside, the lullaby hummed faintly, a background chorus to the tales that shaped their shared history. The community, fractured and fearful not long ago, now found solace in these stories, a foundation to rebuild trust and hope. Back at the shore, Iwan remained long after Mara had gone. He closed his eyes once more, letting the ocean's lullaby wash over him. The melody no longer clawed at his mind but cradled it gently, a reminder of the fragile boundary between life and death, between regret and redemption. The sea was eternal, its song never truly silenced, but tonight it sang of peace. Yuan's heart, heavy for so long, felt lighter. The ocean that had taken so much had also given him a chance to heal. He opened his eyes to the endless horizon, a quiet hope stirring within. Whatever tide came next, he would meet it not alone, but as part of the island and its eternal lullaby. Yet beneath the soothing melody, a faint undercurrent lingered, a whisper that the sea's depths held more secrets still. And as the night deepened, Yuan knew his journey was far from over. The lullaby was a beginning, not an end. He turned away from the shore, the haunting song echoing softly in his soul, a gentle reminder that the ocean's story was woven into his own, forever and always. The gentle hum of the sea's lullaby carried through the island's quiet streets as dawn approached, promising a new day softened by the acceptance of yesterday's shadows. Yuan's silhouette faded into the early morning mist, a man transformed by the ocean's eternal song. The shore stretched before Yuan like a forgotten hymn, jagged rocks and smooth sand bathed in the cool, pale light of dawn. The restless sea whispered its eternal lullaby, waves curling and breaking with a soft, rhythmic hum that seemed less a threat now, more a solemn song of memory. Yuan MacLeod stood motionless, the salty breeze tugging at his salt and pepper hair, eyes fixed on the horizon where ocean met sky in a seamless, endless embrace. For years, the sea had been both his adversary and his confidant, a force of nature that had claimed friends, family, and fragments of his very soul. The haunting lullabies, once sinister and suffocating, had softened into something quieter, almost gentle. They spoke not just of loss but of remembrance, of the invisible threads that bind the living to the dead. Behind him, the crunch of footsteps on sand broke the solitude. Mara Finlay approached, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. Her piercing green eyes softened as she reached Yuan's side, her presence a balm to the ache that had hollowed his heart for so long. "It's different now," she said softly, voice carrying the warmth of shared trials and tentative hope. "The sea still sings, but it feels less like a warning. More like a promise." Yuan nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across his weathered face. "A promise I'm learning to accept." The quiet was punctuated by the slow, deliberate footsteps of old Hamish, the village elder whose knowledge of the island's lore had guided them through darkest nights. Clutching his ancient, leather-bound book, he joined them by the water's edge, his gaunt face etched with lines of wisdom and wariness. "The sea never forgets," old Hamish intoned, voice steady as the tide. "It holds the stories of those claimed by its depths, weaving their fates into its endless song. We honor them not by fearing the ocean, but by remembering and living with its presence." Yuan glanced at the elder, feeling the weight of those words settle deep inside him. The curse had lifted, the siren's rage quelled, but the sea's song would never truly end. It was part of the island's soul, a haunting melody that carried the pain of loss, and the fragile hope of survival. Together, the three watched as the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light over the waves. The ocean's hum softened further, like a lullaby cradling the island in its timeless embrace. Despite the scars etched into their lives, a fragile peace had been forged. Yuan took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs with a renewed sense of purpose. The sea would always sing, always call, but now he could listen without fear. He could carry the memories of the drowned without being consumed by them. Mara slipped her hand into his, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, the isolation that had once defined him began to dissolve, replaced by the tentative threads of connection and healing. "We face whatever comes," Yuan said quietly, "not alone, but together." The ocean answered with a gentle wave, its endless song a reminder of the past, the present, and the future. The eternal tide carried away the last shadows of dread, leaving behind the haunting beauty of a world shaped by loss, memory, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As the island awoke around them, Yuan felt the weight of his journey lighten. The sea that sang lullabies for the drowned had also sung a song of redemption, a melody that would echo in his soul forever, a haunting yet hopeful refrain beneath the eternal tide.